The twin suns were setting over the crystal towers of Atheon Palace. Their light spilled across the silver floors. Touching everything with gold, servants hurried through the long halls. Polishing, dusting, bowing. Each knew that a single mistake could mean punishment. For humans like Lyra, life in the alien palace was not life at all. It was survival. Lyra was small, quiet, and careful. Her brown hair was always tied back. Her uniform always neat. She spoke only when spoken to. The alien nobles looked down on her kind, calling humans low breathers. Her job was simple, to clean the grand hall before the nightly feast of the royal family. Yet she worked with a strange peace because silence was her shield. The sound of claws echoed through the hall that evening. A chill ran down her back. Everyone knew what that sound meant. The royal dragon, Vornax, was awake. It belonged to Prince Kale, the heir of the Crimson Throne. The creature was sacred, older than the palace itself. Its scales shimmered like red glass and its eyes glowed with fire. No one, not even guards, dared to look directly at it. From far down the corridor, Lyra heard the prince's voice, sharp and proud. He was arguing with his advisors about the upcoming coronation. "My dragon doesn't listen," he snapped. "It obeys no one anymore." Lyra froze behind a marble pillar. She could hear the anger in his tone, the frustration, and the sound of chains being dragged. The dragon was being led through the hall. Its wings folded but restless. Its nostrils flared as smoke curled upward. The guards warned the servants to stay out of sight. But a child helper, barely 10 years old, tripped and fell in the middle of the hall. The dragon's head turned at once, its eyes focused on the small human. Its lips peeled back to show long silver fangs. The prince shouted an order, but it was too late. The beast lunged. The air filled with heat and noise. The boy screamed. Lyra didn't think, she just ran. Her bucket clattered to the floor. She threw herself between the dragon and the child. Arms outstretched, the dragon's jaw struck like lightning. Its fangs tore through her sleeve and into her arm. She felt the fire spread through her veins, burning like liquid metal. The guards rushed in with spears, shoving the dragon back. Chains tightened around its neck. It roared, shaking the pillars. Lyra fell to the ground, holding her bleeding arm. The boy crawled away, crying. Prince Kale stood still for a long moment, watching the human who had saved a life that wasn't hers to protect. His face was unreadable, shock, guilt, pride, and something else all mixed together. Finally, he spoke. "Take her away," he said quietly. "She is bitten." 2 guards lifted Lyra by the shoulders. Her vision blurred. The pain was spreading fast. Her skin glowed faintly beneath the wound, a soft golden shimmer like sunlight trapped under glass. The nobles who had gathered to see the chaos whispered among themselves. "A human touched the royal beast," one said. "She'll die before dawn," another murmured. They dragged her down the servants' hallway, away from the music and the light. Blood dripped down her fingers, her head spun in the distance. She could still hear the dragon roaring, long, deep, and angry. That night, she was locked inside a small stone room meant for storage. No doctor came, no healer was called. She tore a piece of cloth and tied it around her arm to stop the bleeding. The mark of the bite pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. The pain had a rhythm now, slow, steady, alive, outside her door. 2 guards whispered, "The dragon bit her. She's doomed." The last time that happened, the victim burned from the inside, the other said. Lyra listened, silent, afraid. She had seen death before, but never like this. She could still smell the dragon's breath, smoke, and ash. She could still feel its eyes staring into her soul. Hours passed, but the burning didn't fade. Instead, it grew warmer, softer. The glow from her arm filled the room with dim golden light. Her breath came slow. The mark shimmered, forming strange lines that looked like writing. Alien symbols. She tried to wash it away, but the light only grew stronger somewhere above. The dragon let out a low growl that shook the walls. The sound felt like it was calling to her. For a moment, her heartbeat matched its rhythm. She pressed her hand to her chest. Terrified in the royal chamber, Prince Kale couldn't sleep. He paced before the great window, watching the twin moons rise. His mind replayed the moment over and over. The human stepping in front of the beast. The bite, the glow, he whispered to himself. The dragon bond. Impossible. Every prince was supposed to form a soul bond with his dragon, a sacred connection passed down from their ancestors. But his bond had always been weak, incomplete. He had blamed himself for years. Now the dragon had bitten a human, and somehow, It reacted as if something ancient had awakened. When Kale went to the dragon's chamber, the guard stepped aside. The great beast lay curled, eyes half closed. But it stirred when Kale entered. "Why did you bite her?" he demanded. The dragon gave a low rumble, staring at him. For a strange moment, Kale thought he saw her face reflected in its eyes. The dragon blinked slowly and then turned away, refusing to meet his gaze. That single act told the prince everything. The beast was no longer his. At dawn, when the palace bells rang, the guards opened Lyra's cell to bring her food, but when the door swung open, they froze. The air smelled faintly of smoke, and the golden light filled the room. Lyra was sitting quietly on the floor. Her wound closed, her eyes open, and in their depths, there was the faint reflection of dragon fire. Outside in the courtyard, the dragon roared again, loud enough to shake the palace windows, and for the first time in years it bowed its head. Not to the prince, but to a human maid. The bite had changed everything, and the palace of Atheon would never be the same again. The next morning began in silence. The palace bells rang as usual, echoing through the marble halls. But something in the air felt strange. Servants whispered in corners. Guards stood closer to their posts, and every noble seemed to avoid talking about what had happened the night before. They all knew the truth. Prince Kale's dragon had bitten a human, and yet she was still alive. Lyra sat on the cold stone floor of her small locked room. Her arm was bandaged with torn cloth, but beneath it, she could feel something moving. The wound wasn't bleeding anymore. Instead, it glowed faintly through the fabric, soft golden light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every pulse felt warm, like fire that didn't burn. She pressed her hand over it and whispered, "Please stop." But the light grew stronger, the glow filled the little room, tracing strange patterns along her skin, lines that curved and joined like writing she couldn't understand. She rubbed it with water, tried covering it with her sleeve, but the symbols refused to fade. From outside, the guards were murmuring, "Still alive?" One asked. "She should have been ashes by now." The other replied, "No one survives a dragon bite." Their voices faded as footsteps approached. The door creaked open and Prince Kale stepped in. He wore a dark cloak that shimmered with red silk. His expression was sharp, unreadable. The guards stayed outside as he entered, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He just stood there, studying the faint light escaping through her sleeve. "You should be dead," he said softly, almost to himself. "I thought I would be," Lyra whispered. Her voice was weak but calm. He knelt beside her, reaching for her arm. She hesitated but didn't pull away. When he lifted the fabric, the golden marks glowed brighter, filling the room with soft radiance. Kale's eyes widened. He had seen drawings of this mark before, but only in sacred texts, legends of the dragon bond. "This symbol," he murmured, tracing the edge of it without touching. "It's not a curse. It's the seal of binding." Lyra blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "the dragon has chosen you." Lyra shook her head, her voice trembling. "That's impossible. I'm just a maid." Kale rose to his feet, his jaw tightening. "The dragon doesn't choose by blood or rank. It chooses by soul." He turned away, pacing slowly. "But no human has ever carried its bond." The words hung heavy between them. Outside, the dragon roared again, shaking the palace walls. The guards flinched, but Kale didn't move. He looked back at Lyra. "When it bit you, it transferred part of its essence. You're connected to it now, heart to heart." Lyra looked down at her arm, watching the glow fade and return. "So I'll die when it dies?" she asked. Kyle hesitated. "Or it will die when you do." He left her with that thought, closing the door behind him. Lyra sat in silence, her hands trembling. She had lived as a servant all her life, unseen, unwanted. But now, a creature of fire and legend had marked her as its own. Later that evening, when darkness filled the sky, Lyra woke to a strange sound, a heartbeat that wasn't hers. It came from the wound, deep and steady. She felt warmth in her chest and then saw faint images flashing in her mind, a burning field, silver chains breaking, golden eyes staring into hers. She gasped and stood, her head spinning. The room seemed to shift, the walls breathing like a living thing. The glow from her arm reflected in her eyes, turning them amber for a moment. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. The door opened suddenly. Startling her, a palace doctor entered, flanked by guards. He carried a metal scanner and looked at her like she was a creature. Not a person. Hold still, he said coldly. He passed the scanner over her arm. It beeped, flashed red, then shut down completely. The doctor frowned. Impossible. Human energy levels can't sustain this. What does that mean? She asked. He ignored her, turning to the guards. She's unstable. The mark will either consume her or evolve. Lyra's chest tightened. Evolve? But the doctor didn't answer. He left quickly, leaving her alone again. Outside her door, Cale was waiting. The doctor bowed. She's different, my lord. The mark is fusing with her life force. If the bond continues, it might awaken the dragon's will inside her. Cale's eyes darkened. Then we're out of time. That night, the prince returned to the dragon's chamber. The massive creature lifted its head when he entered. Its scales flickered with red firelight. Why her? Cale demanded. She's not of royal blood. Not even our kind. The dragon's deep growl filled the room. And then Cale heard a voice, not in sound, but in thought. Because she was brave when you were not. The words made his heart stop. He stumbled back, staring at the beast. You can speak? Through her, the dragon replied, its eyes glowing gold. She carries my bond now. My soul sleeps within hers, Cale whispered. Then what am I supposed to do? Protect her, the voice said, or lose me forever by dawn. Rumors had begun to spread across the palace. Servants whispered that the prince had locked a glowing human in the old wing. Nobles speculated that the dragon had cursed the royal family. Lyra, sitting alone in her room, felt the world changing outside. The mark pulsed again, brighter than before. She touched it and felt the dragon's heartbeat echo through her. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. A strange strength stirred in her chest, whispering of fire, wings, and skies she had never seen. And far across the palace, Prince Cale stood by his window, staring at the horizon. He didn't know what fate awaited his kingdom, but deep inside, he understood one thing. The bond that had once been his now belonged to someone else, and that someone was a human maid with a glowing mark who had changed everything. The palace had always been a place of order, quiet footsteps and strict rules, but now it trembled under whispers. They spread faster than light through the grand corridors, leaping from servant to guard, from noble to priest. Everyone talked about the same thing, the human maid who survived the dragon's bite. No one said her name out loud, but everyone knew it. Lyra, the maid who had once scrubbed the floors of the great hall, was now the center of every conversation. Some called her cursed, others called her chosen. Yet one thing was certain. Nothing like this had ever happened before. In the royal court, nobles gathered in secret. Their jeweled robes shimmered in the torchlight as they argued. A human cannot bear the dragon seal, said Lord Velryn, his eyes cold and proud. It's blasphemy against the throne. But she lives, answered Lady Nera softly. And the dragon bows to her now, not to the prince. Her words silenced the chamber. Every noble turned uneasy for days now. The royal dragon had refused to obey Prince Cale's command. It roared when he approached. Yet when the human maid was near, it grew calm in the servants' quarters, fear mixed with awe. Some of the younger maids left food near her locked door, whispering prayers of luck. Others crossed their arms in front of their chests, muttering, "She'll bring ruin." The palace had become a cage filled with tension. Lyra sat quietly on the floor of her dim room. The golden mark on her arm pulsed gently, like a heartbeat that wasn't fully hers. She could feel the dragon's presence somewhere far away, its hunger, its thoughts, its ancient sorrow. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she saw through its eyes skies of fire, old battles and chains that glowed red from centuries of binding. She didn't understand it, but she felt its loneliness. And strangely, its trust. One night, the door creaked open. It was Prince Cale again. He looked exhausted, his royal confidence dimmed by sleepless nights. "They're afraid of you," he said quietly. "I'm afraid of me too," Lyra replied. Cale moved closer, the light from her mark reflecting in his silver eyes. "The council wants you gone. They call you a danger to the throne. They think the dragon's loyalty will turn against the royal bloodline." Lyra lowered her gaze. "Then kill me. My life doesn't matter to your kind." But Cale didn't answer. He stared at her, torn between duty and something heavier. "If I kill you, the dragon will destroy this palace," he said finally. "You carry its heart." Outside, thunder rolled across the skies, though there were no clouds. The dragon stirred in its lair below the palace, restless. Its golden eyes snapped open. Its heartbeat echoed through the walls, matching hers. The next morning, a royal announcement was made. The High Council had summoned both Prince Kael and the marked human to the great chamber for inspection. The nobles demanded to see the truth with their own eyes. The hall was filled with shimmering banners, floating orbs of light, and hundreds of alien lords. Their faces were cold and painted with disapproval. When Lyra entered, wearing a plain gray gown, the room went silent. Even the guards lowered their weapons slightly. Her mark glowed softly through her sleeve, golden against her brown skin. At the far end of the hall sat the dragon, chained by thick bands of black steel. Its wings folded tight, its head bowed low. The sound of its breathing filled the room. When Lyra stepped closer, the dragon lifted its head. Its glowing eyes locked on her, and then, before everyone, the great creature bent its neck. Bowing gasps rippled through the court. Prince Kael stood frozen beside his throne. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. That gesture, that sign of loyalty, belonged only to the royal heir, and yet the dragon ignored him completely. The High Chancellor rose from his seat, voice trembling. This cannot be. The royal dragon bowing to a human servant? It's a violation of divine law. But no one moved. The power of what they saw had silenced every voice in the room. The dragon's deep growl filled the air, low and protective. It looked at Lyra like she was part of its soul. Lyra didn't know what to do. She simply bowed her head, her hands trembling. The mark on her arm flared so bright that even the orbs of light dimmed. And then, without warning, the chains that held the dragon began to smoke one by one. The steel bands cracked and fell apart as if burned by invisible fire. The nobles screamed. Guards rushed forward. But the dragon did not attack. It spread its wings wide, casting a shadow over the entire hall, and lowered its head beside Lyra. Stand back. Kael shouted, his sword drawn, but the dragon's voice echoed inside his mind. You draw your blade against her, and you draw it against me. Kael froze, the sword slipping from his hand. The silence that followed was absolute. The nobles looked at Lyra with fear now, not pity. She could feel their eyes on her, their hate building like smoke, and yet, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. The dragon's warmth surrounded her, and she felt stronger than she ever had. When the commotion finally settled, the High Council declared her unfit to remain within the palace. They ordered Kael to confine her or banish her to the lower quarters for life. But the dragon growled, sending tremors through the hall, forcing the council to retreat in panic. That night, Kael found her standing by the balcony of her small room, watching the stars. They will never accept you, he said quietly. I don't need their acceptance, she replied. I didn't choose this. But maybe there's a reason. He studied her face for a long moment. If the dragon chose you, the bond cannot be broken, he said. It means your fate and mine are tied now, whether the palace likes it or not. Far below, the dragon spread its wings and let out a long roar that rolled across the horizon. The sound was not one of anger, but of awakening. Something ancient had returned to life, something the aliens had long buried under pride and law, and in the days that followed, the whispers grew louder. No longer just fear, but prophecy. They said a storm was coming, that a human would rise with dragon fire in her blood, and that the palace itself would bow before her light. Lyra didn't believe in legends, but every time the mark on her arm glowed, she felt something deeper stirring, something that told her the real story was only beginning. The days after the council hearing changed everything in the palace. The nobles no longer looked at Prince Kael with respect. Whispers followed him wherever he went. The dragon bows to a human now, they said behind silk fans and jeweled masks. The once glorious heir of Atheon now walked through halls that no longer bowed to him. Kael tried to stay calm, but jealousy ate at him like acid. The dragon, his lifelong bond, had chosen someone else. It didn't matter that Lyra was human, or that she'd never wanted this. The fact that she carried the bond meant she now had something Kael never could. The creature he was born to master had rejected him. He visited the dragon's chamber every morning, hoping it would return to him. But each time he entered, the beast lifted its head only when Lyra came near. If she wasn't there, it slept, ignoring his voice, his commands, his anger. It was like watching a piece of his soul turn its back. The nobles took notice. Their voices grew sharper, their eyes colder. If the bond is broken, one of the generals whispered, then perhaps the gods have chosen a new heir. Others suggested darker things, using her blood to restore the old balance. Kael couldn't sleep. Every night he saw flashes of Lyra's glowing mark, the way it pulsed when the dragon moved, the way she stood in the firelight, calm and unafraid. He told himself his anger was about honor, about royal power, but deep inside, there was something else, a strange mixture of fascination and resentment. Meanwhile, Lyra lived in quiet fear. The servants no longer spoke to her. Some crossed themselves when she walked by. Others dropped food outside her room and ran. She could feel the hostility around her like cold air pressing against her skin. But she didn't complain. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than truth. One evening, the palace lights dimmed and she was summoned to the medical wing. Kale waited there with the royal scientists. Strange machines hummed in the background. "We need to study the bond," Kale said, his tone calm but his eyes hard. "We have to understand what happened to you." Lyra hesitated. "Study me?" He nodded. "If the bond can be transferred, maybe it can be returned." Her stomach twisted. "You want to take it from me?" she said quietly. Kale didn't answer. He turned away and motioned to the scientists. "Begin." They strapped a band around her arm. The golden mark shimmered as the machines beeped. Tiny sparks of light flowed from her skin into the glass tubes. Lyra winced. "It hurts," she whispered. "Hold still," the doctor ordered. But when the glow dimmed for a moment, the entire room trembled. Outside, in the courtyard, the dragon lifted its head and roared. The sound shook the walls. The scientists stumbled back. The machines sparked and exploded, filling the air with smoke and light. The chains that held Lyra snapped from the energy burst. The dragon crashed through the outer wall moments later, its wings tearing through stone and steel. Its roar was pure rage. The guards scattered as flames burst from its jaws. It landed between Lyra and the prince, eyes burning bright gold. Its massive body shielded her completely. Kale shouted over the noise, "Call it off!" But no one dared move. The dragon's tail slammed into the ground. Leaving cracks across the floor, smoke curled around Lyra as she stood trembling. Her mark glowed brighter than ever, pulsing in rhythm with the beast's heart. When the fire died, the dragon bent its head toward her, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Lyra raised her hand, touching the edge of its warm scales. "It's okay," she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried through the hall. The dragon went still, its breathing slowing. The entire palace watched. Stunned, Kale lowered his sword, his face pale. The sight before him was unbearable. His own dragon kneeling for a human servant. Not for the Prince of Atheon. Not for the heir of the throne. The humiliation burned like poison. When the flames cleared and the smoke thinned, Lyra turned to face him. "You can't control it anymore," she said quietly. "The bond doesn't answer to power or rank." Kale clenched his fists. "And what makes you think you deserve it?" "I don't," she said, her voice steady. "But maybe it deserves to be free." Her words struck him like a blade. Later that night, Kyle sat alone in the throne room. The golden banners hung silent. The reflection of fire from the broken walls flickered across his face. The dragon's roar still echoed faintly in the distance. He looked down at his hands, trembling. "It should have been me," he whispered. From the shadows, Lord Velrun stepped forward, his cloak dragging behind him. "You could still take it back," he said. "The scientists have ways, old ways, forgotten ones." Kale looked up sharply. "You mean dark rites. Call them what you will," Velrun said. "But the bond could be extracted. The human is fragile. She cannot hold such power long if she dies. The bond may return to you." Kyle stared into the fire for a long time. His heart was torn between reason and jealousy. He remembered the look in her eyes, the courage, the quiet strength, and for a second guilt pierced through his thoughts. But then he remembered the noble's laughter, the humiliation, the loss of control, and the guilt turned to anger again outside. Lightning flashed across the twin moons. The dragon roared from the tower where it slept, its voice carrying across the skies. Lyra sat on her bed, staring at her glowing arm, feeling something inside her changing. The bond was deepening, growing stronger each night. She didn't know what the palace planned, but she could feel the storm coming. And deep in the throne room, Prince Kale whispered to himself, "If I cannot have the bond, then no one will." The words hung in the air like a curse, and somewhere in the distance the dragon stirred, sensing the shadow of betrayal that would soon test them all. The next morning, the palace of Atheon awoke to chaos. Half the grand hall had been destroyed by the dragon's fury. The marble floor was cracked, the crystal pillars were shattered, and the royal banners hung torn and burned. Smoke still drifted through the corridors, whispering of what had happened in the night. No one dared to speak Lyra's name too loudly now, but her story was everywhere. They called her the Flame-Bearer, the Dragon's Chosen, the human who defied a prince. Prince Kael stood before the High Council with bloodshot eyes. His pride was gone, replaced by quiet rage. Every noble present stared at him as if he had lost control of his kingdom and his dragon. Lord Velryn leaned forward, his silver eyes gleaming. "This cannot continue, my prince," he said. "The dragon now answers to the human girl, and the palace cannot serve two masters." Kael's voice was cold. "What do you suggest?" "The ancient law," Velryn said, his tone sharp. "The dragon law that predates the throne itself." The word sent a murmur through the chamber. The ancient law was old, written before the royal line began. It was said that if the dragon ever chose a new master outside the royal blood, that person must face the trial of the flame if they survived. They would be crowned as a keeper of the dragon. But if they failed, they would burn body and soul. Until nothing was left, Kael hesitated. To invoke the ancient law was dangerous. It could change everything. But the nobles were watching, waiting, judging. If he showed weakness now, he would lose the throne. He clenched his fists and said, "Summon the girl." Down in the servant quarters, guards arrived at Lyra's small room. She had barely slept, her arm still glowing with faint light. When they entered, she rose quietly. "Am I being punished again?" she asked softly. "By order of the High Council," the captain said. "You are to face the trial of the flame." They took her through the broken corridors toward the great chamber. As she walked, servants and soldiers watched in silence. No one dared to speak to her, but some bowed their heads, others looked away in fear. When she entered the chamber, hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Kael stood on the throne platform, wearing his ceremonial armor, his expression unreadable. At the center of the chamber stood a massive circle made of ancient runes. Glowing red and gold, a column of fire blazed at its heart, twisting upward like a living serpent. "The trial of the flame," the High Chancellor announced, his voice echoing. "By the law of old, the one who carries the dragon's mark must step into the sacred fire. If she is true, the flames will become her wings. If she is false, they will consume her." Lyra's hands trembled. She looked up at Kael, searching his face. "Is this your will?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Kael hesitated, then said, "It is the law," but his heart twisted as he said the words. The guards backed away as the flames roared higher. Lyra took a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the mark on her arm spread through her chest. The dragon's presence stirred deep within her mind. "Do not fear," the voice whispered. "The fire remembers who it belongs to." She stepped forward. Each footfall echoed across the chamber. The nobles leaned forward, eyes wide. Even Kael's fingers tightened around the edge of his throne. When Lyra crossed the rune circle, the fire bent toward her. It didn't burn, it reached. Curling around her like a living thing, the mark on her arm flared bright gold, and suddenly, the flames wrapped around her entire body. The nobles gasped, some screaming as her form disappeared into the blaze. Kael stood, his heart hammering. "Stop it!" he shouted, but it was too late. The flames had consumed her completely. For a moment there was only light, pure, endless light. Then the chamber fell silent. From within the fire a single sound rose, a heartbeat, slow, steady, powerful. The golden flames began to twist and change color, turning silver, then white. A blinding flash filled the hall, and when it faded, Lyra stood in the center of the circle, untouched. Her gown was gone, replaced by a shimmer of glowing scales that looked like armor. Her eyes burned with soft light, and across her back spread wings of flame. Translucent, beautiful and alive, the fire bowed to her will. Not the other way around, the nobles fell to their knees. Even the High Chancellor dropped his staff. Trembling, "It's impossible," he whispered. "The fire accepted her," another noble murmured. "The law has spoken." Kael took a step forward. Unable to speak, Lyra looked at him, her expression calm but distant. "The dragon's bond isn't a curse," she said softly. "It's a choice, and it chose me not for what I am, but for what I dared to do." Behind her, the dragon roared, its massive wings unfolding through the shattered wall. It lowered its head, the same way it had in the great hall. But this time when it bowed, the fire around her responded, forming a halo of light. Kael's breath caught in his throat. He had expected her to die, to burn and disappear. Instead, she had become something greater than anyone could have imagined. He felt both awe and pain, pride and defeat. The nobles cried out, "She is the keeper. The flame has spoken." Kale turned away, unable to bear the sight. For the second time, the dragon had bowed, and this time, the entire palace had bowed with it. As Lyra looked down at her glowing hands, she felt a strange sadness. She hadn't wanted power, only to survive. But now the fire of the dragon flowed through her veins. She could feel its memories, its pain, its centuries of loyalty and loss, and deep within that warmth, a truth whispered to her. The bond had never been about control or rank. It was about courage, about heart, about one soul standing unbroken before the fire. Outside the palace, the twin suns broke through the storm. Their light struck her wings, and for a moment, it seemed as though she carried the dawn itself. Lyra turned to the council and said quietly, "The fire has spoken. Now let it burn away your pride," and with that, the flames behind her rose again, not to destroy, but to cleanse. And the ancient law that had once enslaved dragons and divided bloodlines was rewritten in the name of a single human maid who walked through fire and came out crowned in light. The morning after the trial changed everything in Atheon. The palace, once filled with cold marble silence, now thrummed with whispers of awe and fear. The servants called her the Fireborn. The nobles called her the Flame of Fate, and even the guards bowed when she passed. Lyra, the human maid who had once scrubbed floors, now walked through golden corridors with fire still faintly glowing beneath her skin. But she didn't feel like a queen or a savior. Her heart was heavy and her thoughts restless. She could still feel the dragon's heartbeat echoing in her chest. Slow, deep, ancient. It was no longer a presence outside her. It lived within her now, like a soul whispering in her blood. From the balcony of her new chamber, she looked down at the city below. The twin suns painted everything in light. She should have felt peace, but instead she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes watching. They didn't see her as human anymore. They saw her as a symbol, of fear, of power, of change. Behind her, the sound of boots echoed. Prince Kale stepped in, his armor gleaming under the morning light. His expression was calm, but his eyes told another story. He hadn't spoken to her since the trial. Now he stood in the doorway, watching her with unreadable eyes. "You survived the fire," he said finally. "I didn't survive it," she replied quietly. Turning to face him, "I became part of it." He stepped closer. "Do you even understand what you are now?" Lyra met his gaze. "No, but maybe that's the point." Kale's jaw tightened. "The council sees you as a threat, not a savior," she sighed. "They've always feared what they don't control." He nodded slowly. "They will act soon. You need to be careful." For a brief moment, something human flickered in his voice. Concern, guilt, maybe even admiration. But before he could say more, a loud roar shook the air. The windows rattled. The floor trembled. Outside, the dragon circled the palace towers, its wings stretching wide against the sky. Its scales gleamed gold and crimson in the sunlight. The nobles below fell to their knees. Kale and Lyra both rushed to the balcony. The dragon landed in the courtyard with thunderous force. Its eyes met Lyra's, and in that moment she heard its voice in her mind again. "You have walked the fire. Now you must walk the sky." Her breath caught. "Walk the sky?" she whispered aloud. Kale looked at her sharply. "What did it say?" But before she could answer, the dragon spread its wings and released a pulse of light that rippled across the city. The mark on her arm flared with heat. It wasn't painful this time. It felt like an invitation without thinking. She stepped forward and placed her hand against the dragon's snout. Fire swirled around them both, golden and alive. Kale shouted her name, but the sound faded into the roar of wind. In an instant, the palace vanished beneath her. She was rising into the clouds, carried by a storm of light and fire. The dragon flew through the endless sky. Its wings slicing through the twin sun's rays, Lyra held tightly to its scales. Feeling the rhythm of its flight in her bones for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the fire. She was the fire. They soared above mountains of crystal and rivers that glowed blue like veins of stars. From that height, Atheon looked small, its towers like candles, its nobles like shadows. The dragon's voice filled her mind. "You are the bridge, the last spark between two worlds." Human and dragon, heart and flame, she closed her eyes, letting the warmth guide her. "What am I supposed to do with that?" She whispered. "Burn away the chains," came the answer. "Even if the chains are made of crowns." Hours later, they descended back toward the palace. The people below gathered in the courtyards, watching with awe as the dragon landed. When Lyra stepped down, her eyes glowed faintly gold, and her hair shimmered with sparks that faded into ash. The air around her shimmered, and even the guards felt the weight of her presence. She was no longer just human, but not entirely dragon either. She was something in between, something new inside the great hall. The High Council was waiting. The nobles stood in rigid rows, their faces tight with fear and pride. At their center stood Lord Velran, the one who had whispered the law into Kael's ear. He stepped forward, his voice cold. The dragon has bonded to her soul. But such power cannot remain unbound. He raised a black staff, ancient and sharp-edged. By decree of the council, she must surrender the bond. The dragon growled from outside the walls. Lyra felt its anger rising through her veins. Kael took a step toward Velran. Enough, the fire chose her. You'll kill us all if you— Silence, Prince, Velran snapped. You've already failed your birthright. Lyra lifted her hand, the golden mark burning brighter. You call yourselves rulers, she said softly. But you live in fear of what you don't own, Velran sneered. A servant dares lecture me? Her voice grew stronger, deeper, touched with flame. Not a servant, she said, a witness. The air thickened with heat. The flames that once obeyed the council now curled toward her. Bending at her will, Velran raised his staff to strike, but before he could, the dragon's tail smashed through the wall. Shattering the marble dais, the nobles screamed, running for cover. Fire and smoke filled the hall, but Lyra stood unmoving in the center of it all, her eyes burning like the sun. Kael shielded his face from the heat, shouting over the chaos, "Lyra!" Stop, but she didn't hear him. Her voice rang out above the noise, calm and steady. This palace was built on control, on fear. But fire doesn't kneel. The flames lifted around her. Swirling like a storm of light, Velran fell to his knees as his staff melted to ash. Lyra lowered her hand and the fire obeyed, fading into silence. The chamber glowed faintly, scorched but alive when the smoke cleared. The nobles stared at her in stunned silence. Kael stepped forward, his expression torn between awe and sorrow. You've changed everything, he whispered. Lyra looked at him, her voice quiet but firm. No. The fire did outside, the dragon roared once more, spreading its wings across the dawn, and in that moment, everyone in Atheon knew. The trial of fire wasn't over, it had only just begun. Night descended over Atheon like a wounded shadow. The once bright towers stood dim, their lights flickering in the smoke-stained air. The people whispered of omens, the roar that had shaken the stars, the fire that had consumed the High Council chamber, the human girl who now walked as flame-made flesh. No bells rang that night, no music echoed through the halls. The palace that had ruled for centuries had gone silent. Lyra stood alone in the ruins of the throne hall. The floor was cracked and blackened from fire. The golden banners of the royals had burned to ash above her. The moonlight streamed through the shattered roof, touching her shoulders like silver dust. She was calm, too calm for what had just happened. The dragon rested outside, its great head lowered beside the open archway, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Its breathing rumbled softly like thunder in sleep. It was watching her even as it dreamed. Its pulse still entwined with hers. Kael entered quietly. Armor scorched, cape torn. He moved slowly, as though each step carried the weight of a crown he no longer wanted. When his eyes met hers, he saw not the maid who once cleaned his halls, but something greater, something that frightened him as much as it humbled him. She didn't turn, just said softly, "They're gone, aren't they?" "The council fled," he answered. "Those who stayed are dead or silent." Lyra's voice was steady. "The fire didn't mean to kill. It only burned what refused to change." Kael approached, stopping a few paces away. "You burned my kingdom," he said quietly. "My bloodline's legacy, my power." She turned to him at last, eyes glowing with the faint gold of the dragon's fire. "No," she said, "I freed it." Kael's fists tightened. "You call this freedom? Ruins, fear, chaos?" She stepped closer, her tone firm but gentle. "The same chaos your people created when they caged a living god for centuries. You wanted power and you called it order." The words stung more than he expected. He looked away, jaw clenched. "You think you understand my burden? I was born with chains too, Lyra. Mine were just forged from duty." For a long moment they stood in silence. Only the faint wind moved through the broken arches, carrying the scent of ash and smoke. Then from outside the dragon stirred. Opening one golden eye, its voice echoed inside their minds. "The flame cannot serve two hearts. Lyra felt the meaning of those words like a whisper against her soul. She looked at Kale, realizing what the dragon was warning. It wants peace, Kale, not rule, not war. He shook his head. Peace? The nobles will come back with armies. They'll say you're a monster, that you bewitched the beast. She smiled faintly. Then let them come. The fire will answer for itself. The sound of her calm voice unsettled him. It wasn't arrogance, it was truth. Kyle exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. You should leave Atheon, he said finally, before they turn their fear into another war. And go where? She asked. Everywhere this light touches belongs to your people. He hesitated, then said, not beyond the Iron Desert. There are no kingdoms there, only the old ruins. You could disappear. Lyra turned toward the dragon, its scales shimmering faintly under moonlight. Disappear, she repeated, after all this? Her eyes softened. The dragon didn't choose me so I could run. She stepped closer to Kale, her voice low, almost kind. You can rebuild this place. Differently this time, not with fear, but with truth, he frowned. And what about you? I'll do what the fire asks of me, she said. And it doesn't whisper of crowns, it whispers of wings. The dragon shifted outside. Raising its head as if it had heard her words, the air shimmered with heat. Golden light spilling through the cracks of the ruined hall. Lyra walked toward the great creature, her steps leaving faint trails of embers behind. Kale followed. Stopping at the threshold as the dragon knelt before her, she placed her hand against its snout, her mark blazing. It's time, she whispered. Where will you go? The dragon's voice rumbled softly. Where the fire is still chained, she replied. There are others who need its light. Kyle stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. Lyra, if you go, Atheon will never be the same. She looked back at him with sad eyes. That's the point. He lowered his head, realizing this was goodbye. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You don't need it, she said gently. You just need to change. The dragon spread its wings, the air around them trembling with heat and wind. The palace guards, those who had survived, gathered at the far end of the courtyard, staring in awe. They didn't see a servant or a queen, only a blazing figure standing beside a god of fire. As the dragon lifted into the sky, its wings cracked like thunder. Flames trailed behind them, painting streaks of gold across the night. Kale stood watching until the light faded into the clouds, his heart heavy. For the first time, the silence of the palace felt like truth, not pride. Days turned into weeks, and whispers spread across distant lands, tales of the fire-born maiden who had walked through flame and silenced kings. Some said she flew beyond the mountains, freeing dragons still trapped by old bloodlines. Others claimed she vanished into the stars, becoming the spirit of the flame itself. Back in Atheon, Kale rebuilt, not the throne, but the city. He tore down the slave towers, freed the humans, and let the dragons roam the skies without chains. Each dawn, he would walk to the highest balcony and look to the horizon. Sometimes when the suns were rising, he swore he could see a faint shadow cutting across the light, wings of fire against the dawn. And when the people asked about the legend of the Fireborn, he would smile faintly and say, she was once a maid, but she taught us all what it means to serve the fire. And thus, the palace that had once ruled through fear learned silence. Not the silence of pride, but the silence of reverence, because sometimes the greatest kingdoms don't fall to war or betrayal. They fall to truth, and high above the clouds, the dragon still flew, its rider cloaked in light, watching, waiting, guarding a world reborn from flame. The palace had fallen silent, but the legend of the fire that loved a human would never die.